Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, please take the roll.
Members, if you can please make the selections on your tablets. Chair, we have a quorum with 10 members present and 5 members absent.
Thank you. Let's begin with non-agenda public comment. This provides 2 minutes for anybody who'd like to comment on something that is not on today's agenda, but is within the purview of MTS. Clerk, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
We have no public comments, Chair.
All right, we'll move on to our consent items. The consent agenda includes items 3 through 24. I believe General Counsel Landers would like to pull item 22.
Yes, please.
Okay, item 22 has been pulled from the consent agenda. We will take that up immediately following passage of the remainder of the consent agenda. Clerk, is there any public comment on the balance of the consent items?
Yes, we do have one public comment. Blair Jason, if you can please make your way to the podium. Oh, right over here.
Okay, are you ready for me? Okay.
Could you please speak into the microphone just so that we could hear you?
Here, can you hear me?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to make a comment on the potential fare increase and how it might affect lower income areas and decrease like how many people use the MTS services. I feel like if we increase the fare, less people are going to ride, and people who can't afford gas or cars are going to be stuck if the fare increases and they can't afford that, either lower income areas, low income families, people that might not be able to afford like a lot of things that are expensive. And I feel like just increasing the price is going to like affect like these lower income families in lower income areas. And it's probably going to decrease the number of people who use the service. Like, so actually losing money, like increasing the prices might actually make you guys lose money because less people will be riding because it's too expensive. And people who don't have cars and can't afford might be stuck with nowhere to go and stuck at home, which isn't a good thing. That's it.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Chair, that concludes public comments.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? All right. We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Clerk, please take the roll.
Members, if you can please make the selections on your tablets. No, is the one seeing that?
My tablet, and I think other members' tablets are not accepting it.
Try it out. Chair, the motion passes with 11 members voting yes and 4 members absent.
Thank you. We'll now take up item 22, which was pulled from consent. Ms. Landers?
Yes, and I apologize. I did not realize when I put it on consent that this item does require a separate vote by the board and a verbal report to you about what it's about. So this item is approval of a new policy, number 67, which is the technology disruptions during board meetings. It is required by SB 707 that all public agencies by July 1st have a technology disruption policy in place. And there's 2 main components that are required to be part of it. It's related to remote participation by the public at our meetings. And so if remote participation is interrupted due to a just technology problem, then the board is required to recess for at least 1 hour for staff to try to work to restore that service. And if the remote service has not been restored after 1 hour, then the board may choose to do any of the following. They can either adjourn the meeting, extend the recess for additional time to restore service, or take a roll call vote to continue the open session portion of the meeting without remote access. We obviously would try to be efficient with your time. So if we had a closed session, we could do that during that time period. But this proposed policy just meets the requirements of that statute. And so we'd ask that you approve it.
Thank you, Ms. Landers. Clerk, do we have any public comment on item 22?
We have no public comments, Chair.
All right, we will open it up to board discussion on this item, and we'll go to Director Hall.
Yeah, I'm just making the motion to approve. It's everybody's aware of SB 707. So
I will second that.
Very good. Thank you. We have a motion from Director Hall, a second from Director McCann. Seeing no further discussion, clerk, please take the vote on item 22.
Members, please make the selections on your tablets. The motion passes with 12 members voting yes and 3 members absent.
All right, item 25 is the fiscal year 2027 operating budget discussion. Gordon Meyer is going to provide the presentation.
Good morning, Gordon Meyer, Manager of Financial Planning. So as mentioned, I'll be presenting the current draft of the FY27 operating budget this morning. So to give a brief overview of our process, we do use a zero-based budgeting process. That's in contrast to a traditional historic budgeting process. In a historic budgeting process, managers only need to justify variances versus the prior year, which is treated as a baseline. In a zero-based budgeting system, every line item must be approved or reapproved each year. So there's no automatic approvals of a baseline. In these presentations, we typically talk about the year-over-year changes, but it is built from the ground up with no automatic approvals. So we began our budget development process in January. We met with all of the managers from each department and we reviewed their current expense trends. We also asked the managers to discuss and justify each of the line item details in their budget requests. We also reviewed their current position tables as well as any headcount change requests. And then primarily we rolled up the mid-year amendment, which went to the board and was approved in March, which was for FY26. At that same time, we started looking forward to FY27. And what you're seeing today is our current draft, which is still considered preliminary of the FY27 operating budget. So most assumptions are finalized, but we will be talking a lot about finalizing the personnel budget and position tables as well. And then we will take any feedback that we get from today's meeting and incorporate that into the final version that's going to be coming back in June. So getting into the actual figures, so the first section of our operating budget that we'll look at is the operating revenues, and our primary operating revenue is fare revenue. So our fare revenue forecast is made up of 2 main components. It's our ridership forecast and then our average fare assumption as well. So on the ridership side, in our current forecast, we're projecting a 1.1% growth rate over the FY26 projected ridership. And the way we came up with that is we had initially come up with a baseline passenger revenue forecast that did not consider any impact from a fare increase. In that baseline forecast, we were assuming ridership growth of 2.3 million passengers, which represented a 2.8% growth rate. And then after the decision on the fare increase was made, we are now layering the projected impact of that on top of the baseline forecast. So based on the details in the fare study, we're now reducing that baseline forecast by 1.4 million passengers. And based on that projected impact, we're now projecting ridership at 81.7 million passengers for FY27. On the average fare side, in the baseline, we were initially assuming $1, which is essentially the status quo of where we are today with no fare increase. And then we layered on the projected impact of the fare study as well. And so we're now projecting $1.11 for FY27. That represents a 10-cent increase or over 10% increase in fares. So based on our ridership forecast and our average fare forecast, we're projecting 90.2 million for FY27, and that represents growth of 9.4 million or almost 12%. Over FY26. So visually, you can see July through August, that green line, which is our FY27 budget, is just a little bit higher than FY26. And that's just due to that ridership growth that was assumed in the baseline. And then we are assuming an October 1st start date for the fare increase. And so you can see that budget figure jump up drastically in October and then stay high for the remainder of the year. Also within operating revenues, we have a variety of different other operating revenues. So the first one we'll look at is energy credits. So we generate energy credit revenue through two different programs. We have the low carbon fuel standard program, which is administered by the state. And then we have the renewable identification number system, which is a federal program administered by the EPA. So for both these programs, one of the major drivers of our overall budget performance is the market rate of the credits. And so for the LCFS side, we're assuming $70 per credit for FY27. As of yesterday, they're just under $67. So we're assuming a little bit of growth. And then within the LCFS forecast, we're also assuming a full year of higher credit generation for our fixed guideway or trolley electricity use. So we generate credits by using electricity because it's considered a zero emission fuel. In the middle of this current fiscal year, there was a program change at the LCFS that made it so that we generate the same amount of credits on our older infrastructure as we do on our newer mid-coast substations. So higher credit generation, and we're reflecting that for a full year in FY27. Also within our LCFS forecast is we are including the sale of 60,000 banked credits that we've been holding as the price has been increasing. We do plan on selling those in fiscal year 27 at $70 per credit. On the RINs side, we're budgeting at $2.30 per credit. It's currently above $2.40 and it's averaged a little over $2.30 for the entire fiscal year so far. So reasonable assumption there. Overall, we're projecting $13.1 million for energy credit revenue, which represents a $2.4 million increase or almost 23% for FY27. Advertising revenue, we're projecting $7.2 million in total. So this includes all of our vehicle advertising, our bus shelter advertising, bus bench advertising, and some of our other advertising sources as well. We're projecting an increase of $922,000 over FY26. That's being driven by significant revenue generation for the gas lamp sign. That's the digital billboard by the convention center. We've seen really strong sales this year, and so we're assuming a similar year next year. This also reflects $397,000 in projected advertising revenue from some new marketing initiatives. These were described in detail during the fare increase presentation at the last board meeting, but it included some of the new digital kiosks, new wraps on the Rapid 235, among others. Real estate related revenues. So that's our land lease revenues projected to increase by $151,000 overall. And then next line is interest. So this is one of the biggest changes in looking forward to FY27. So we are reducing the budget for interest revenue by almost $4 million or 52%. That's primarily due to declining cash balances because we no longer have stimulus funds coming in, and we're also utilizing the rest of our operating deficit reserve in this current fiscal year FY26. Contributing to that as well as we are building in a rate decrease in the second half of next year from 3.5% to 3.25%. Worth mentioning here that we do have all the SB 125 funding sitting in a bank account that we are generating interest on, but that's considered restricted and it can only be used on SB 125 funded activities. So we do plan on using the principal first, and then we will be able to spend that interest, but it'll probably be in a few years. So it's not coming into play for the FY27 operating budget. And then lastly, we have a line for other. This includes naming rights revenue, fair media revenue, and then other miscellaneous revenues as well. In total, we're projecting other operating revenues at just under 33.5 million for FY27. And that's essentially staying almost exactly at the FY26 level because of that downward pressure from the declining interest. So that covers all of our operating revenues. So moving on to subsidy revenues. So that includes all of our sales tax revenues, grants revenues, et cetera, that are not generated through operations. The first batch we'll look at is sales taxes. And one of our major sales tax revenues is Transnet. So Transnet is the 1/2 cent sales tax that's assessed in the region. It's administered by Sandag. They provide us with a forecast each year, and then we build our budget based on that. So Sandag is projecting 446 million for the region in FY27, and that represents a growth assumption of 2.1% in overall cash receipts. You can also see the projections for the next 5 years as well in that table or the chart to the right. And you can see the purple bars are Sandag's forecast. And then the green bars are forecasts that are done by a company named Avenue that is contracted by Sandag to do their own independent forecasts. And so for Transnet, both these forecasts are moving very closely. So we do like to see that. For our own budget, we are using Sandag's slightly more conservative figures, which are the purple bars. So of that 446 million projected for the region, that gets broken down into a variety of different buckets. So 33% of that will go to local system improvements, which is specifically to the county and cities for roads and road repairs. 42% will go to the Major Corridors program, which funds the capital component of major projects like the Midcoast implementation and the bus rapid transit projects. 8.1% goes to new operations. So this is the piece that provides us with ongoing reimbursement for our operating and maintenance costs for Transnet funded projects. So for us, that includes the bus rapid transit routes, Superloop, and Midcoast. So based on our projected expenses for those services, we are expecting to generate 39.4 million in cost recovery through Transnet reimbursement from Sandag. Now, the remaining 16.5% goes to the transit system improvements, and that's the piece that's available as part of a formula. So based on the overall receipts, our apportionment of that is 48.6 million. From that, 5.5 million gets taken off the top to provide fare discounts on senior, disabled, and youth passes. That's a static number every year. And then the remaining 43.1 million is available for MTS to use on both bus and trolley operations. So little note here at the bottom, this does not reflect any of the ongoing discussions with Sandag on a potential reallocation amongst the different buckets. Those discussions are ongoing, and this is the current way this is allocated. Moving on to Transportation Development Act, or TDA. So this is the statewide 1/4 cent sales tax. This one is also forecasted and apportioned by Sandag each year. TDA is different from Transnet. So Transnet is received as the cash is generated each month. For TDA, we file a claim in the beginning of the fiscal year based on Sandag's budget. And then if the cash receipts come in higher than that claim amount, then the excess cash receipts go into a reserve at the county that's available in future fiscal years. If cash receipts trail the Sandag budget amount, then we're able to draw from that county reserve to make sure we receive the whole claim amount. So TDA can and is used by MTS for both the operating budget and the capital improvement budget. For the region, Sandag's projecting just under 208 million for FY27. That only represents a 1% regional growth assumption, which is very modest compared to the historical growth rate of a little over 3%. Based on that, the projected MTS apportionment is 137 million for FY27. So based on our budgeting, we have 133 million of that going to the operating budget, and then we have 3.8 million going to the CIP. So our overall TDA available to MTS is increasing by 3.1 million or 2.3%. And that's represented with a $27 million increase in the operating budget because we're shifting an additional 25 million from the capital budget to the operating budget in FY27 to 50 million in total. And then it reflects a $24 million reduction to TDA that's going to the CIP. So once again, you can see the 5-year forecast here. We are using Sandag's more conservative forecast. On the TDA side, there's a much larger divergence between Sandag and Avenue's forecast. At this time, though, we are using the more conservative forecast from Sandag. State Transit Assistance or STA. So this is still a sales tax revenue and it's derived from the state sales tax on diesel fuel. So this is a recurring formula fund that's administered by the state and it's distributed both on population as well as agency revenue. It is a historically volatile source. It's been used in the past by the state to meet its own general fund obligations. In addition to that, it's tied to diesel fuel sales as well, which has been a declining commodity. The projection by the state that our budget is based on includes a projection of 30.1 million. Of that, we're planning on putting 11.3 million in the operating budget, which is typically a static number that we include. And then the remainder is going to the capital budget. Moving on to federal revenues. So the primary source of federal revenues for MTS is the Federal Transit Administration or FTA. So we receive a variety of different formula funds. We receive over $100 million each year. Most of that comes through Section 5307, Section 5337, and then Section 5339. And these formula programs are authorized under what's called the Surface Transportation Reauthorization at the federal level. So the most recent reauthorization was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that was passed in December of 2021. That current legislation expires on September 30th of 2026, so the first quarter of the new fiscal year 27. We don't know what the reauthorization is going to look like at this point, but for now we are assuming kind of status quo. We're not assuming a large increase or a decrease. This formula funding can be used for both capital projects or the operating budget, but if it is used in the operating budget, it can only be used for preventive maintenance, which is essentially any maintenance expenses. And so generally when we're budgeting this, we do try to maximize the amount of this formula funding that we use for preventive maintenance in the operating budget. And that's due to how this funding is received. It is received on a reimbursement basis after the costs are incurred. So if we were to take this $100+ million and put it into multi-year capital projects, we wouldn't receive all of that cash until those projects were completed. By putting it in the operating budget, we're able to incur a full year of maintenance expenses. And then these grants are awarded right after the close of our fiscal year. So almost immediately after they're awarded, we're able to submit a drawdown, bring in $70+ million in the bank and start drawing interest or earning interest on that cash. So it really helps with cash flow. And so overall, the federal funds in the operating budget are increasing by 6.1 million. That's mostly due to increasing the amount going to preventive maintenance versus FY26. Also included in the federal revenue projection is 2 discretionary awards. We do have 300,000 reflected for the Otay Mesa Transit study, and then we have 200,000 that we received from the Department of Homeland Security Transit Security Grant Program for funding some of our existing canine patrols. Moving on to the SB 125 revenue. So this is the $4 billion in state funding that was distributed to transit agencies through the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. So that TIRCP program historically is a competitive program where you apply and compete with other agencies for major capital awards. A few years ago, it was temporarily distributed based on a formula and then was also opened up to be used for operations as well. Part of the intent of that was to help agencies as they face their financial uncertainty. So this funding is being used by MTS for both operations and capital. We're expected to receive 237 million over multiple fiscal years. We've received about 3/4 of that so far and do plan on receiving the last payment as well. This funding is particularly important for us because it's the balancing mechanism until we run out of this funding. And so we budget all of our expenses, all of our other revenues, and then whatever that gap currently is, we're balancing with this funding. So you can see the projected amounts by funded activity in the table to the right. We are funding security, Iris Rapid, the Route 910, and then that additional 15-minute trolley service as well. And then that last line is the structural deficit balancing. You can see in this current fiscal year 26, we're only using 3.5 million to balance the budget. That's because we're primarily using the remainder of our operating deficit reserve. But next year, we won't have the operating deficit reserve. And so the amount of SB 125 that we're using to balance is going up by almost 32 million. So we are projecting to use over 45 million of SB 125 in FY27 based on this current budget draft. Last slide on subsidies. So we do receive funding from SANDAG, specifically fast track funding, which is toll revenue from the I-15 managed lanes. So this funding is used to subsidize services that are in the I-15 corridor. So for us, that's the Route 280 and 290. We are receiving $1 million in FY27. The overall fast track funding being provided is decreasing $2 million from FY26. And that's because in FY26, SANDAG provided $2 million in fast track revenue as a swap with Transnet. And so the impact is that in FY27, they're not providing that additional fast track, but we'll be receiving $2 million additional in Transnet. So it's a net zero impact to the overall budget, but the fast track revenue is decreasing by $2 million. So here you can see the current revenue summary based on the assumptions we talked about. So operating revenues are projected at 123.7 million overall. That's an increase of 9.4 million or 8.2%. Most of that is due to the fare increase. And then total subsidy revenue is projected at just under 359 million. That's an increase of almost 70 million. And the two main drivers of that is the additional 25 million that's being shifted from the capital budget to the operating budget in FY27, and then that $32 million increase in the SB 125 that we're using to balance this year. Then lastly, there's the reserves line. You can see the 68 million figure in FY26 is the remaining balance of our operating deficit reserve. And then that goes almost to zero in FY27 and actually goes negative. And that represents a small contribution from the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Railroad, which is a self-funded entity, to their own reserve. So we're back to the reserves just being SD&AE and then the for-hire vehicle administration. So in total, revenues are projected at 482 million for FY27. That represents an increase of 11.4 million or 2.4%. Moving on to expenses. So one of the main drivers of our overall expense budget is service levels, and we'll talk about each operation separately. So on the rail side, we are building in a decrease of 2.6% in revenue car miles. So that's different from a train mile. We typically run 3-car trains, but in this case, we're going to start running 2-car trains during limited non-peak times on certain lines. By doing so, we plan to save some electricity costs as well as parts costs. There is no change to train revenue hours, so there's no reduction to the number of operators or operator hours due to this change, just running 2-car trains during certain times. On the fixed route bus side, we're building in a decrease of 2.4% in revenue miles, and that's based on the January service levels as well as the additional changes that are planned for June. And then on the paratransit side, we can't schedule that. It's based on demand. And so based on the current data, we're projecting an increase of 9.1% in billable service for that operation. So moving on to the first expense category. So first we'll look at personnel costs. We've spent a lot of time over the last few months at the executive committee talking about this, and we are presenting it a little differently than we typically do. So there's a few slides on this. We are budgeting in this current draft 1,786 total employees. And then that can be broken down into 1,332 represented or union employees, and then 454 non-represented or non-union employees. So what we mean by represented is that they're the employees that have current collective bargaining agreements. So we have 5 collective bargaining agreements. We have 2 with the IBEW, 1 from ATU, 1 with SMART, and then 1 for the TEOA. Each of those agreements has a set term, and then each of these agreements establishes the rates of pay, the wage increases, and the benefit package for each position covered by that agreement. For the non-represented or non-union staff, there are no agreements in place, and the wage rates and benefit packages are set by the board during the operating budget process each year. That includes setting the salary grade ranges, and then CEO pay is established under ordinance number 1 of the administrative code. So we've broken this down and we're presenting the represented personnel costs and non-represented personnel costs separately. So first we'll look at the represented or union employees. So as mentioned, we do have collective bargaining agreements for each of these groups. And each of these groups has current CBAs in place. So nothing's in negotiation right now. We have the ATU, IBEW, SMART, and TEOA. In each of these agreements, the raises for FY27 are all 4%, and that is after receiving substantial raises in the first year of each of the current CBAs. So in year 1 of all of the active CBAs, the pay raises ranged from 7% to over 12% for some of the bus operators. And then in these same agreements, there are no annual raises that are less than 4%. Looking at it from a budget perspective, the year-over-year increase will be a little higher than 4% for the TEOA, which represents our code compliance inspectors. And that's because they just received a 7% increase in February of 2026. And then that will be followed by another 4% increase in March of 2027. So overall, taking into account the collectively bargained wage rates and then our forecasted hours as well, represented staff wages are increasing by 3.3 million or 4%. On the fringe side, overall fringe costs are decreasing versus FY26, and that is all due to the change to the San Diego Transit Defined Benefit Plan, the amortization change to the UAL payment. So this was a change that was approved in February. And this had no impact on employee benefits and was rather a change to the payback period of the unfunded liability. If you remove the impact of the amortization change, then represented personnel costs, which includes both wages and fringe, are increasing by 4%. So moving on to non-represented employees, I wanted to give a brief overview of which staff this includes. So this does include administration and management staff across the entire organization. So on the bus operations side, that includes all of the frontline supervisors, so road supervisors, dispatch supervisors, those kind of positions, maintenance supervisors for both the bus and facility maintenance, all of the training staff, all of the safety staff, all of the customer support staff, and then some of the management and administration specific to those services as well. And then on the rail side, once again, that includes all the frontline supervisors, transportation supervisors, communication supervisors, those positions, all the maintenance supervisors. We have 4 different maintenance departments, security supervisors, all the training staff, all the passenger support representatives, and then the management administration for some of those as well. And then it also includes your typical administration departments. So that would be the departments that support operations. So that would be human resources, IT, marketing, planning, legal, finance, procurement, et cetera. So over the last few months at the EC, we've looked at a variety of different operations for the non-represented pay. We did have a few different options come out as a recommendation for from the last week's executive committee meeting. So we'll go through those. The official recommendation from the EC was a 4% merit pool for non-represented staff. That is what is currently reflected in this budget draft that's being presented. That would be consistent with a 4% increase in all the collective bargaining agreements for fiscal year 27. And then part of that EC recommendation was also to discuss two other alternatives as well for a full discussion at the board. So alternative one is what we're referring to as the zero growth strategy. This would set the budget target for non-represented personnel expenses at zero growth over FY26. So this would require multiple initiatives in order to achieve that zero growth target. And ultimately, it'd be left to the chief executive officer to manage to that target. The second alternative brought forth is where instead of paying a 4% merit increase to the non-union employees, that 4% would instead be paid as a one-time bonus in FY27. And because it's a bonus payment, it's not pensionable. And then that bonus amount would also not count toward any future salary increases. So there would be very limited savings in fiscal year 27, but you would have significant downstream savings beginning in fiscal year 28 and beyond from not having a merit increase in fiscal year 27. So we did compile kind of the fiscal impact of these different options for presentation. So the first row in the table is the 4% merit option. That's the current EC recommendation, and that's currently what's reflected in this budget draft. That option is expected to cost about $323 million over 5 years. Then that first alternative is the zero growth strategy. This was the original staff recommendation at both the last couple executive committees. For this one, if we were to select this option, we would save $2.9 million in FY27. So we would reduce the current budget draft by $2.9 million. And then we would be expected to save about $3 million per year off of the structural deficit each year for a compounded savings of $15 million from the structural deficit over 5 years. And then the final option is the 4% bonus payment versus a merit increase. That would be expected to save about $200,000 in FY27. So not much change to the current budget draft. But then looking at the 5-year forecast of 28 through 31, we'd be expected to save a little over $2 million per year off of the structural deficit for a 5-year compounded savings of $9.3 million off the structural deficit. So this slide, we have the projected budget for the non-represented employees based on the current assumption, which is the EC recommended 4% merit pool. So based on that assumption, non-represented personnel costs are increasing by 2.1 million or 3.3% versus FY26. For non-union staff, if you remove the impact of the San Diego Transit pension amortization policy, spending on the non-union staff is increasing by 5.6% versus FY26, and that is primarily due to the increase in the health and welfare spending. Looking at the personnel costs combined, so we're not attributing workers' compensation to either non-represented or represented. Those costs are projected to increase by $576,000 or almost 11%. So in total in this draft, total personnel costs, so that includes both represented and non-represented, are increasing by $5 million or 2.4% versus FY26. Moving on to purchase transportation. So purchase transportation is the words that refer to our contracted bus service. And we have two major contracts that make up the spending. The first is our Transdev contract for operating our services at the East County and South Bay garages. And then the second contract is also with Transdev, and that's for operating our paratransit and minibus services out of Copley Park and Kearney Mesa. So for both these contracts, the overall costs are determined by the contract rates. We pay both a fixed monthly fee, which is the fixed rate, and then we pay a variable rate per unit of service that we operate. And then the service levels that we operate also determine the overall contract cost. So on the major fixed route contract for East County and South Bay services, we have revenue miles decreasing by 2.5% based on the schedules. The fixed cost component is increasing by 3.1%. And then the variable rate that we pay is increasing by 2.9% per revenue mile. So the decrease in revenue miles that's projected is offsetting some of those variable increases in the variable rate in FY 27. And you can see in the table, that first line, the fixed route contract is projected about 88 million for FY 27. That's an increase of 950,000 or 1.1%. On the paratransit minibus contract, the fixed cost piece is increasing by 4.5%. That's just based on the contract. And then the variable rates increasing differently depending on the service. So for the minibus portion, the variable rates increasing by 3.7% per revenue mile. The forecasted decrease in revenue miles is 2.3%, so partially offsetting that contract increase. And then on the paratransit side, the variable rate per revenue hour is increasing by 1.8%. On the paratransit side, we are forecasting that 9.1% increase in demand. So we are expecting a large increase in costs there. So just looking at the table, the minibus costs are projected at just over 6 million. And then the paratransit costs are projected at just under 21 million. That's a 12% increase on the paratransit side. So in total, we're projecting about 115 million in spending for our purchase transportation in FY27. Moving on to outside services. So we have this broken down into 4 different categories. The first is contracted security costs. So we are projecting 16.3 million in this budget draft. That's an increase of a little over $1 million versus FY26. The current contract expires on December 31st, so halfway through fiscal year 27. We did put a little extra dollars in there, anticipating increased costs in a new contract. That's really kind of a wait and see, but we do have a little buffer in there. On the repair and maintenance side, we're decreasing the budget by 2.6 million from FY26. That's primarily due to the budget for tie replacement. We had 3.8 million in FY26, and we're bringing that down to $1 million for FY27. Engines and transmission overhauls. This is for the bus side. We're increasing the budget by 560,000 or almost 50%. And that is based on the unit pricing. That contract's currently in procurement, and based on the initial bids, we're expecting a 50% increase in the unit costs. Lastly, we have other services, which are decreasing by 357,000 overall. We do have some of the kind of non-recurring one-time projects that are funded in this budget draft listed below. If you do have any questions on those, please ask and we'll try to get those answered. In total, outside services are projected at 59.7 million for FY27. Moving on to energy. So the 2 major drivers of our energy budget are our electricity costs for powering all of our light rail vehicles, and then compressed natural gas for powering the majority of our bus fleet. For both these, the main drivers of our budget are the rates that we pay as well as consumption. So on the electricity side, we pay a commodity rate and then the transmission and demand rate. So we purchase the commodity through a third party. We're very lucky to be in a program called Direct Access, where we purchase it through a third party. We save 30 to 40% each year on the commodity piece by being in that program. We still have to pay SDG&E for the transmission and demand costs. So on the commodity piece, we're building in a 3.3% increase. And then on the SDG&E piece, we're forecasting a 12.2% increase. So overall, we're projecting to pay about 43 cents per kilowatt hour in FY27. That represents a 9.5% increase in the overall rate. On the consumption side for electricity, we are decreasing the consumption by 1.8% versus FY26. And that's some of the savings that we, from running the 2-car trains, that electricity is distributed amongst all 3 trains. And so by cutting one of the trains, you do have some savings there, as well as the weight that the train is carrying as well. Looking at the budget as a whole for electricity, we're projecting 33.8 million. That's an increase of 4% overall. It's not higher because FY26 had a $1.8 million catch-up payment for 2 substations that weren't billed for a few years. That won't be recurring in FY27, hopefully. And so the year-over-year change is only 4%. On the natural gas side, so here as well, we purchase the commodity through a third party. Here we purchase it through clean energy, and we save a lot of money by doing that as well. And then we're able to generate all the energy credits from that too, because we purchase 100% renewable fuel. And so on the commodity piece for CNG, we're projecting a 10.2% increase in the rate. And that's based on the current Department of Energy forecast, as well as the current futures market as well. Here, we also still pay SDG&E for the transportation of that fuel through their infrastructure. Here, we're building in a 15% decrease year over year, and that's because we already know what the rate is for the first half of the year, and it decreased in January of this year. So we are building in a slight increase next January, but the rate came down so much this year that it is overall a net decrease looking forward to FY27 for the transportation rate. So overall, we're forecasting $1.38 per therm for FY27, and that's a 4.7% increase in the overall rate. Consumption, we are reducing 6.5% from the FY26 amended budget. Part of that is the final service levels that we're using for the projection. And then also the current consumption trend this year has been trending lower than typical. So we are reflecting that lower usage in this forecast as well. And then looking at the table, you can see that third line there, gas and propane, we're building in a 658,000 or 22.4% increase. We do have higher fuel prices for crude oil built into this forecast. And then lastly, we have other, which is slightly declining by 32,000. So in total, our energy budget is projected at 52.6 million for FY27, and that's 3.2% increase. All right, last slide on expenses. So materials and supplies are projected to increase by 606,000. That is mostly due to the LRV or light rail vehicle drive unit overhaul project. So we are increasing the budget by 800,000 here to 2.8 million in total. And that is based on the schedule for those overhauls on the contract. We hope to wrap that up in FY27. We are reducing the original revenue vehicle parts, or we're reducing the revenue vehicle parts for the light rail vehicles by 337,000 versus FY26. And that's due to savings projected by running the 2-car trains. For risk management, we're projecting 15.7 million in total spending. That's a $2 million increase versus FY26. And that's due to premiums increasing. So that includes the big ones are property insurance and excess liability insurance. Those are expected to increase by 838,000 or almost 9% overall. And then we are increasing the budget for claims by 924,000 versus FY26. That's based on an updated timeline for the projected claim payouts. So some of the payments that we anticipated for this current fiscal year, FY26, we're now anticipating for fiscal year 27. So we're increasing the budget in FY27. We should see some favorable variances in FY26. Overall, we're actually planning to use less from our self-insurance reserve than we had assumed in the FY26 amended budget. So overall, these other expense categories are increasing by just under 3 million or about 6.5%. So here you can see the expenses summarized. In total, we're projecting expenses of 482 million in this draft. That represents 11.4 million in increased spending or 2.4%. So here you can see our overall 27 operating budget consolidated. So you can see our recurring revenues, which includes our operating revenues and our recurring subsidy, is projected at 388 million. Then our total expenses based on the last slide are projected at 482 million. That leaves us with a projected structural deficit, which is our recurring revenues minus our expenses, of just under 95 million. So in order to get to our overall balanced budget, we include the non-recurring items, which is the reserve activity, the 50 million that's being shifted from the capital budget to the operating budget in 27, and then the 45 million in non-recurring SB 125 funding. So with those included, we do have a balanced budget in this draft for fiscal year 27. So here we have a preliminary 5-year forecast. So this takes the current FY27 budget draft. So that first column is exactly the same as what we just saw on the last slide. And then we layer on preliminary economic factor assumptions. So this is things like how much is sales tax going to grow? What are we expecting for inflation? What are we expecting for personnel growth? It does not represent any policy changes or major changes that have not been discussed. And so this is really FY27 treated as the status quo, given some high level expectations about economic factors. How do we think this is going to look? So here you can see the structural deficit is projected to start at about 95 million in 27 and then grow gradually to about 134 million by 2031. And then you can see here at the bottom line, we are projected to be able to balance fiscal year 2029. And then fiscal year 2030 is where we would have a true deficit and need to either find additional revenue or cut additional expenses to balance. This does reflect the projected impact from the fare increase as well. So we do want to highlight 2 dates. You guys saw this at the fare study presentation as well, but fiscal year 2029, it's circled in blue, is key for us because it is the potential, or it is the election year in 2028, where if we do decide to go for a ballot measure, that would be when we would go for that. We are currently projected to be able to get through that fiscal year. And then fiscal year 2030 is the year where if we were awarded a ballot measure, that's when we would actually start to begin receiving that cash. And so our goal has been to be able to get through fiscal year 2030 without any additional help. So in this current projection, we still have about a $37 million gap to do that.
And if I could highlight for Gordon, if I could highlight this also, even without the idea of a ballot measure, this gives us more runway to find other more sustainable funding sources, whether it's through something at the state level, TDA reform, God knows, federal might not be what we're going to be looking at. But anyway, it's independent of a ballot measure. We really need to stretch out our fiscal cliff to give ourselves options other than significant cuts to our service network.
All right. So, so the goal so far has been to get through 2030. As Sharon mentioned, we do have that $38 million gap. Sharon just covered most of this, but we will continue to look for additional funding sources. We'll also continue to maximize our other operating revenues. So really do the pushes for things like advertising revenue, maximizing our energy credit revenue, et cetera. And then we'll also continue to look for operational savings as well. And then also wanted to remind the board that the comprehensive operational analysis, or COA, is still currently underway. So that full analysis will be completed in FY27. And our goal so far and continuing will be to hold service levels as long as possible. And then we will continue to use the data from the COA to look for service efficiencies and savings opportunities. The planning department's already used some of the data that's come through so far to make some of the tweaks and minor changes to routes to identify some cost savings reflected in this budget. So next steps, we'll take feedback from today's discussion, and then we'll finalize all of the FY27 assumptions. One of the big ones is we need to finalize the personnel assumptions, and then we'll reflect that in the position tables that'll be brought back to the next meeting. Based on today's feedback, we'll prepare the full budget book. We'll update the 5-year with the final FY27 forecast, and then update some of those economic factor assumptions as well. And then ultimately we'll present the final draft to the executive committee on June 11th, and then hold the public hearing on June 18th, where we hope to receive approval. So that brings me to the last slide, the staff recommendation that the board of directors provide direction to staff on all of the revenue and cost assumptions within the FY27 draft operating budget. And then the executive committee did have forward a recommendation relating to non-union personnel cost assumptions. The executive committee approved a recommendation that the board include a 4% merit pool for non-union staff to be dispersed at the discretion of the chief executive officer. And then the executive committee additionally recommended 2 alternative non-union personnel cost options be presented at the board meeting for consideration and discussion. That included that alternative 1, which is the zero growth strategy, which was the original staff recommendation the last couple of meetings. And then alternative 2, which was the 4% one-time bonus payment strategy. And with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We have no public comments, Chair.
All right, we will open board discussion on this item. All right, we have the staff recommendation and we will go to Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. I guess without discussion, I'll go ahead and move the staff recommendation to accept the budget as presented.
All right.
Well, the staff recommendation is that we get direction on our revenue and cost assumptions. But the one big one is the executive committee recommendation. So if you're moving that you would like the board just to bless kind of what we've presented today as our basic assumptions for June, then that would be what you would be.
Okay, let me clarify that. I will move to accept the staff recommendation of the budget as presented with the clarification to accept the executive committee recommendation of a 4% merit pool for non-union staff.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Happy to second that motion. We'll go to Director Dillard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I just had a couple of questions on page 22. I was just when you were talking about SDG&E, I was just wondering if we've ever tried negotiating with SDG&E to see if they would help us in any way for maybe bringing down their costs to help us given our challenges that we're having, maybe leveraging that. Has that been thought of, or have you already asked, or is it not a consideration?
Yeah, so my understanding is the rates are actually, they're published and there's set rate schedules that cover different kinds of customers. So it's not specific to MTS. I'm not even sure if they wanted to, if they could reduce rates just for individual customers. And it's something we could definitely look into, but all the rates are submitted and approved by the CPUC too. So
Okay.
I don't think it's an option, but it is something we could consider.
At least explore.
Find some information on.
Yeah, I didn't expect much, but you never know unless you ask. So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions for page 17. I think that is about somewhere on there. We're talking about multiple options. Yeah, multiple initiatives. So with that, in regards to the ballot measure, I would be interested to know what plan B might be, because if that fails or the board decides that they don't even want to do it, given the already given projections for even just 2027, as far as, nationally, looking at the economy nationally, it doesn't really look good. And so I'm worried about having to achieve the 51% for the Citizens Initiative, because I don't even see it going on the ballot to receive 2/3 of the vote. That isn't even like, when has that ever happened? I don't know, but with that said, I'm just wondering what's plan B if that doesn't work, since we're talking about multiple initiatives and I only see 2.
This is just for fiscal year 27's budget. It's not for projecting it's not for setting the budgets for the next 5 years.
Except for that, I think that you would already be thinking about plan B, because when I spoke to you about this, you said that you were going to ask the board members like in late 27. And I think that, that would be a big concern to me, that the board hasn't been maybe updated as to what, is really going to happen in just 27 alone. So I would just like to hear it, and maybe you could share it at another time. It's, just something where I would think that we should be looking ahead in case this initiative isn't even a consideration for us. My other question is that, and I think that was on page 1, actually, where we were talking about a zero-based budgeting process. And I was just wondering if you could give any details as to some, and you don't have to give a lot of details, but just maybe some examples of how you would be able to intend to budget a zero based budget for 26, 27.
Yeah, so what we mean by that is, so when the managers submit their department requests, they have to provide, there's a line item for every one of their expenses. And so let's say there's a line item for travel for a particular event. Like, we don't look at travel and just be like, oh, we approved 60,000 for your department last year, so we'll approve 60,000 again. What it means is that we're going through every line item. And if you're not going to this conference this year, then that budget's being taken away. So there's no approval of any starting place. And so we're really looking at every line item in that budget form, which includes all the contracts, and then the different buckets that they break their budgets down by. And then we're looking at that. And if it's something that was approved a few years ago and it's not necessary now, it's removed. And that's all that we mean by zero-based, is that there's no automatic approval of like a starting place.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I just want to basically cover my my proposal. I think that's on page 18 is where it starts or something. Is that right? The breakdown, just for the board members. This happened, over a month ago, where I made a motion. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about it, because it looks like the staff recommendation is the cheapest way to go. So I just want to say that my proposal was never intended to punish salaried employees or diminish their contributions. Our management and administrative staff are valued and essential to agency operations. The agency is facing a structural deficit of $90 million, and our riders have been asked to absorb fare increases and service impacts. It is reasonable for leadership and administration to participate in temporary cost containment efforts. This is about shared responsibility, accountability, and transparency, not punishment. My proposal is temporary, a one-year approach subject to annual board review. One-time payments are a common fiscal tool during periods of financial uncertainty. They allow recognition of employee contributions without permanently increasing structural costs and permanent liabilities. And that was my driving point. The goal is to balance employee recognition with responsible financial stewardship. The public expects this board to lead by example. That is what responsible governance looks like. And that is why I was supporting my proposal. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Dillard. Let's go to Director Hall.
Can you go to the final slides that show the dollar amounts? We're gonna be upside down.
They show the what?
Just one, I think the one before that one.
Okay.
In 2031, we're gonna be 84 million, if I'm reading that right. You know, we keep talking about starting in a year or two or at the end of the year. We got to go through this right now. You know, we can actually break even if we save about $12 million a year. We got to go find it right now and go remove it. I know everybody wants to be nice, but the reality is we can't afford to. That's over $100 million right there over the 2 years, and you can't wait. You know, everybody keeps looking for a bailout. That's great. That's free money if it comes in, but I'm not counting on free money. I'm looking at reality, and that's reality. Look us in the eyes. So that's all.
Thank you, Director Hall. Any further board comment? Let's go to Director Mendoza.
I just had a question about your to clarify the motion. So does that, we're being asked to recommend one of these alternatives, and I wasn't clear if which alternative we're recommending.
The middle paragraph there, relating to non-union personnel costs, the executive committee approved a recommendation. The board include a 4-point merit pool for non-union staff at the discretion of chief executive officer. That is what's included in the staff presentation of the numbers.
Okay.
And that is my clarification of.
But what about the second paragraph where we have alternative 1 and alternative 2?
Those were presented, but that's not part of my motion for approval.
That's not, okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Mendoza. Let's go to Director Elo Rivera.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the work on this. One, I want to acknowledge that the challenges that MTS is facing are not completely unique to MTS. I know that transit agencies across the country and around the state are struggling as well for a variety of reasons. That being said, we had a long conversation about fare increases, and I understand and appreciate where the board landed on that. But I voted no on that because I did not believe that we'd done everything that we could possibly do to find revenue before asking working families that depend on the system to pay more. And from what I'm reading in the staff report, the operating revenue is up 9.4 million from fiscal year 26, and that is primarily due to the projected impact of the fare increase. And in that sense, this budget feels balanced or seems balanced on the premise of increasing fares on working families. So since I arrived on this board, I've been pushing for non-fare revenue because we see the cliff coming. We've seen the cliff coming, and there are opportunities that, while not transformative on their own, are meaningful nonetheless, and are not balanced on the back of San Diego working families. And I do appreciate that efforts are being made along those lines. Member Dillard brought up the conversations with SDG&E, but an alternative to that are the conversations that are beginning to happen with San Diego Community Power to either bring down energy costs or increase revenue from potential leases on our property for solar power. there's a variety of options to pursue, and some of those are being pursued. We're starting to see a little bit of incremental growth in terms of advertising revenue. But at the end of the day, again, what I see is a budget that's balanced on the backs of riders. And San Diego is one of the wealthiest regions in California. It has one of the largest tourism economies in the country. And I really just truly believe that we need to be more aggressive and act with more urgency in seeking revenue from the wealthy and from tourists before we are leaning on our riders to balance this budget. So for that reason, I'll be voting no on the budget as presented. Again, I appreciate all the work that's been done, but I think it's important to remain consistent on this point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. Let's go to Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a more clarifying questions and procedural questions. So just want to be clear for Member Dillard, was your alternative 2, the one-time bonus payment strategy? Okay.
You're talking about the one-time 4% payment.
Yeah.
With the freeze.
With the free, okay. So that was your alternative, okay. So for fare increases, I guess I'm a little bit confused about the process for fare increases. So I want to ask about that process, and then I want to ask if there's an assumption of increase in this budget.
Yes, so we are reflecting the board's decision last month that we would recommend to SANDAG that the regional fare, comprehensive fare ordinance be adjusted to increase the fares based on the option that was put before the board. We've assumed that it goes into effect October. In the event that the SANDAG board does not approve it, we would then have to come back at the amended revised budget at mid-year to revise the budget to reflect the decision that they have come up with, just as we do with all expenses and revenue assumptions, because in 6 months, the world could be different.
Okay, yeah, I think I was not in attendance, so that's why I'm missing a gap in my head. Okay. What does that adjustment look like for riders? What is the actual cost of increase per fare?
I think Mark Olson's here. Mark, would you mind coming up and explaining what the proposal that SANDAG is going to be bringing out to public hearing?
Yeah, good morning, Board. Mark Olson, Director of Marketing and Communications. So the recommendation is primarily on the adult monthly pass, which today it's $72 per month. We would do an increase in 2 phases. So in fall 2026, that would increase to $85 a month. And then in fall 2027, it would increase to $95 per month. And the reason that we're focusing on the adult monthly pass is that's the real driver for revenue for us. It creates about 88% of our total fare revenue that we get. And so really to help with the budget challenges that we're having, it's really moving that monthly pass up to 85 and then to 95.
And it hasn't been increased since 2009.
Correct.
And so that would be for monthly passes only, or would that be for? Do we have
no,
a general fare increase?
The other passes would go up as well.
And how much?
Day passes and one-way passes.
Okay.
I don't have the chart in front of me, but I believe it's currently $2.50 for the one-way pass. In phase 1, that would go up to $3. And then in phase 2, that would go up to $3.25. The senior passes would go up as well from $1.25 to $1.50. We would keep the senior passes in the different categories consistent after that first increase. So it'd stay at $1.50 even after the second phase of increases. And then the day passes would go up. Currently, they're $6. And then in phase 1, that would go up to $7. And that would stay consistent at $7 for the adult day pass. But really the driver is that monthly pass, which we haven't increased in quite some time. But and really it comes down to the fact that, we don't want to have to increase unless it's totally necessary. And that's why it hasn't increased. And when you look back at the last time we did this increase, we were experiencing similar challenges with the Great Recession that happened back in 2009 timeframe. And that's why we're back here today.
Last question, and apologies to my colleagues because I wasn't here last time, so I'm probably asking questions you all already discussed. When we do our projections based on a fair increase, is there any valuation that accounts for people who may no longer be able to afford what we are increasing our fares to that would otherwise be able to afford if we did not increase?
So Sandag's model includes a projection for ridership decline based on the fare increases. So that was also
Discussed.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any evaluation on a possible MTS reaction to fare evasion based on fare increase?
We are incorporating what we believe to be increased collection of fares based on the trends that we're seeing after the changes in our security personnel.
Is there any
decisions that were made.
projection of increased security and cost based on fare increase and what that may do to fare evasion?
No, the increases to the security and fare enforcement personnel were already approved, and they're in part being paid for by SB 125 funding.
Which is a finite, that's not ongoing revenue, right? Or is, I guess the way.
Well, it was
Yeah.
projected for 5 years, but
Okay.
Mike, did you want to add to that? Or
Yeah, we're not adding any additional staffing for security, either on the contract side or internal side, as a result of the fare increases. We're just using the same enforcement efforts that are in place today.
Okay, just asking because I do believe oftentimes that when we make those decisions, we don't necessarily take into account their impact on the line, even from a financial standpoint and a holistic financial standpoint. Sounds like there's some modeling, but there are impacts when we increase fares that are negative also to the transit line, and I'm also very concerned about that. So thank you for going through that with me.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe. Let's go to Director Foster.
Yes, thank you. I'm still very concerned with the fare increase. I did not support the item when it came before this board. And I must say, the past few weeks at the city of San Diego have been very, very challenging and difficult. And I am in the process of a very complex budget conversation. And we just made a decision on, well, let me say this. We have been having a conversation about parking fees for quite some time. And there was a decision made to stop paid parking at Balboa Park. But yet we are here today and looking at taking action to a ridership that is that has been verified to be 70% low income. These are folks that depend on this service to get from point A to point B, whether it's for a job or or to go see their medical doctor to get care. And so I think we are just doing a disservice if we are not doing all of our homework to do what's in the best interest of the people. And so I am still not in a position to support this. And I just, again, I'm going to use the terms of someone that I hold in high regard. Tell the two cities how easy it is to give a certain group a break, but how convenient it is to continue on the backs of the most vulnerable. So I will leave that there, and I will not be supporting this item today. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Foster. Let's go to Director Dowdy.
Yes, thank you. I will be supporting this budget because I think this is the step we need to show future voters for our ballot initiative that we are raising rates because we have no other choice, and we're cutting funds, we're consolidating routes. I think this is a step in the right direction. I hope we're not gonna have to make more draconian cuts in 2030, but people need to see this is just the beginning if we can't get other funding. And although I appreciate Councilmember Dillard's idea, as an energy attorney, you can't have one rate negotiated for one entity, even if it's another very important government service being provided. The only way we can cut electricity is to use less electricity or shift from a more expensive fuel to a less expensive fuel. At this point, we've taken some of our capital money away from doing more electrifying buses. I don't know if we've done the modeling yet to see if it's cheaper to do that in the future or less, but obviously that's an option we could look at when the time comes if that could save further money. I don't see we have any other choice, so I'm going to support the budget, and I do appreciate the work staff has done. I mean, as you look at this, we are going to be raising more revenue. We're even going to be getting more passengers, and we're decreasing costs. I mean, that's what we need to do every year in a budget, and I think staff should be applauded for the work they've done for this budget. I look forward to seeing how much more we can do to get our budgets so that we can continue to decrease costs, but I will support this year's. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dowdy. Let's go to Director Barreto.
Thank you. I too appreciate all the work that staff has put into this budget. There was a robust conversation at our executive committee, to which I basically voted no to move this forward for various reasons. I do understand that we're having a conversation about the fare increases, and I too was unfortunately not here for that vote. And I am not supportive of fare increase, and there's various reasons why I'm not supportive. Since COVID, it's been a very delicate situation with our ridership. I 3-4 years ago mentioned the death spiral of our ridership and how delicate that was for us. I think staff with their innovative ways have proven that our ridership is moving in the right direction. And I think that a fare increase at this moment would greatly impact our ridership and the people that trust in MTS to get to their final destination. You're asking for direction on this budget. This budget assumes an increase in our increase in our budget based on future fare increases. So I will be voting no on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Barreto. Let's go back to Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all your hard work on putting the budget together. It's a big budget. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, since 2009 to today, and they use the Los Angeles CPIU, Los Angeles for our area, is up 60% from 2009 to today. So costs have increased on the whole 60%. To go from 72 to 95 in still a couple of years would be a 32% increase. So we're not even asking our riders to recover the full inflation that we've incurred since 2009. And even today, we have a 4% increase in labor. So costs keep going up. So it's important that we address that. I am sensitive to people who live paycheck to paycheck, but we're not asking them to incur the entire inflation that's been occurring. More importantly, there's two other factors. If we go to if a citizens group goes to the sales tax in 2 years, the voters will ask, what have other people done to share in the cost of this as well? Or will this entirely be on the back of voters? And I think voters will say, we want to see shared participation in this solution. So if we say no fare increase, do the voters say, well, you're asking us to pick up 100% of the increase? Will voters go for that? I don't know. I think voters would say we would like to see a shared solution. And finally, the marketing efforts, the months and months of surveys and community forums, people have said, we're okay with a modest increase in the fare, just don't cut our service. So even the people that we talk about at the most difficult level of financial living day to day have said, please don't cut our service. If you must increase fares, and we've come up with this number from $2.50 to $3 or 72 to 95. What I'm hearing from those writers is, I'm okay with that. If I have to do it to not have service cut, I'll do it. That's the other part of the story here. So that's why I've made the motion as directed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Let's go back to Director Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the conversation here. I think one thing that I could be more clear about, and I want to make sure I am clear about. I understand that costs have increased and the agency has to account for that. And I'm not opposed to the idea in theory of asking riders to pay more. My bigger issue in this moment, it's the context of the moment and why we are where we are and what's happened before we got to where we are. And it goes back to that conversation, that theoretical conversation that I keep talking about, which is for a rider who depends on this system, if they ask me, what did you do? What did MTS do to avoid increasing my fare? I can't look them in the eye today and say we did everything we possibly could. I could say we're trying to do stuff, but I don't think we've done everything we can. And everything that we can is there's a broad and long list of things that we could do. And a really important one to me is being more creative and pursuing options at the state level to leverage San Diego's place as a region with immense wealth and that is as attractive as it is to tourists, to lean into that. There's another part of this conversation that I just have to call attention to because of the folks that I represent. We sometimes talk about transit riders as if they are a separate segment of society. Transit riders are my constituents. Transit riders are the residents of San Diego County. Transit riders are our voters, just like drivers are. And we talk about transit riders, both choice and those who depend on the system, in a way that is completely different than we talk about folks who drive. And I think it's incredibly important that at this agency in particular, we do not do that. We do not unnecessarily feed that narrative. Roads are subsidized an incredible amount. Folks who live in suburbs, the amount of cost there is to building those roads and maintaining them for a relatively small amount of people is significantly higher on a per person basis than it is for getting working class folks from denser urban communities on a bus or on a trolley to work. And we never bring that up. And that's fine. We bake that into the cost of society. But I think we should do the same with our transit riders. I think that's only fair. And so, yes, when we ask transit riders, would you prefer to pay a little bit more or not have a way to get to the things that you have to do? Of course they say, well, I guess I'll pay more. But as is so often the case, when we're talking about the decisions that we're making that are impacting working class people, we present a false choice. I'm sure that if we ask them, would you rather tax the rich or pay more for your fare, they would say tax the rich. I'm sure if we said, would you rather tax tourists or pay more for your fare, they would say tax tourists. So again, I understand where we're at. I understand that costs increase, and at times that means we're going to need to make sure that what we ask riders for keeps up with the times. What I'm asking is that we don't do that. We don't balance a budget on the backs of working class riders before we've exhausted other opportunities. And that means stepping back and being far more creative about how it is that we pursue revenue. And the last point I want to make, we keep talking about this ballot measure. I'm going to keep saying it. It is highly speculative that there will be a lane for a sales tax for MTS in 2028. There are significant, important, ongoing conversations about citizens' sales taxes going on the ballot in 28 for the city of San Diego. There's one that is on the ballot for the county in this fall. And if MTS is not ready to pivot into a place where other tax options are available to it, we're going to find ourselves relying on a option that is not there, which also happens to be the most regressive form of taxation that we have in the taxation tool belt. So again, I respect the points have been made. I certainly respect the work that's gone into creating this budget, but I needed to get that part out there, especially the part about making sure that we're not perpetuating the idea that transit riders are free riders and drivers are all contributing in a fair way. There's working class folks who depend on their car. There's working class folks who depend on their bus, and we need to be doing everything we can to make life easier for them and start looking to the folks who have the most instead of putting this on their backs. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ela Rivera. Any further board discussion on this item? Seeing none, we have a motion from the vice chair, seconded by the chair. I will read the motion and make sure that it captures the vice chair's intent and that it meets the needs of the staff. I have the motion as to direct the staff to adopt the assumptions in the presentation that we saw, including the executive committee recommendation on non-represented employee compensation in formulating the budget that will come to the board for approval in June. All right, clerk, please take the vote.
Members, please make the selections on your tablets. Chair, the motion does not pass with 8 members voting no and 5 members voting yes and 2 members absent.
Thank you, clerk. I will turn to our CEO and ask how you would like to proceed.
It would be very helpful if those who voted no could provide us with some feedback on which assumptions you would like us to remove or add. We obviously don't need to say today that we're going to do that, but we are required to have a balanced budget as of July 1. So we will need to come back in June and have the public hearing. Unless you want to set up special meetings in which we can have more of a discussion about what other assumptions you'd like us to change, we could certainly schedule those with you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooney. Let's go to Director Hall.
Yeah, my main concern goes back to that slide 29, I think it was. And it just comes down to the fact that well, the one that, yeah, that one, 27. I'm really concerned about where we're going to end up. And I know this is for 1 year, but the reality is we have to start now so we can at least get, the goal was get through 2030. I remember, we're going to have a ballot initiative in 2020. I remember that talking to the ones that have been here, that was going to happen, 6 years ago. I think it might have been before that, actually. Your memory might be better than mine, but this has been coming on for, the 8 years I've been on this board. of the fiscal cliff, Well, the problem is do we stop buying buses? Do we have to go back and do other things? We have to take care of this. And I know that it's hard. I know it's going to be a tough decision, but we have to do it. And that's the most important thing to me is that red number there, the red box there. Because sooner or later, what are we going to do? We're going to cut service and cut routes and cut everything. I assume that's all we can do. I don't know. Somebody may bail us out. Congratulations if they do. But again, I just look at reality. I don't look at wishful thinking.
Thank you, Director Hall. Any further discussions? Director Ela Rivera.
I want to be transparent that I don't know that this will change, but I think it's a fair question, Sharon. You know, if you're not supportive of this, what will you be supportive of? I need to see a clearer roadmap for how we're going to look to do the things that I'm asking for that extend beyond leaning solely on riders. So I don't know what that looks like in a spreadsheet because I'm not sure. It may be too speculative to put those numbers in there, and that is the frustration that I felt because Ron's right. So I got to this board in January of 2021, and I don't know if there's been more than 2 months consecutive that I've gone without talking about non-fare revenue as being an essential piece of the puzzle. Elevate SD was supposed to be the thing that got San Diego, got MTS on a long-term sustainable fiscal path. I understand that. I recognize that. Go ahead, Sharon.
I just wanted to correct that. Prior to the pandemic, we were on a structurally sound basis. It really was the disturbance that occurred with that and the inflation and the need to make our wages consistent with the market, affordability issues. So 2020 was really about expanding the network and really increasing our reach throughout the county. We're at a very different point at this point.
Yeah.
And we recognize that. We've been attempting to find solutions over the last 6 years to try to address that. You know, the federal government recognized it, the state government recognized it, but right now, what I'm trying to get us to is a 1-year operating budget that we can continue to grow towards these other options. The only option that MTS has for creating a new source of revenue, subsidy revenue for us right now is the sales tax. That's why we talk about it. But that does not mean we're not trying to get different things happening at the state level. For instance, I was going to talk about this after we resolve the budget things, but I need to explain to you what's happening with regard to the greenhouse gas reduction fund, possibly some of our SB 125, et cetera. And that's happening right now at the state level. So ultimately, I just want to recognize that this is a problem that was really pandemic era related, and we're in a very different place now.
Understood. That turned the world upside down for many folks and many types of work, for many public agencies, certainly transit agencies. We've bounced back in terms of ridership better than almost anyone else. But I think that speaks to the fact that the overwhelming majority of our riders need MTS. And so I understand that this budget is meant to preserve service. And that is the frustration that I feel is we've now walked ourselves so far down the path that the conversation that we're having with our riders is, do you want to pay more or do you want to have a service reduction? And I was just going to say it like this. it has felt like it's taken too long and required too many requests to get those other efforts to be taken seriously, and then once they've been taken seriously, to be pursued. So I don't have a elegant, one sentence response to how to present a budget to me that I'll be supportive of. I just want to contextualize again why it is that I'm taking the position that I am, and offer that if I see a roadmap that seems thought out and targeted to minimize impact on San Diego's working families, and a commitment to execute that plan with urgency, I might have a different position. But as it's being presented to us, that's why I'm not there. Anyway, but it's a completely fair question, Sharon, and it's like we do have to answer that.
Thank you, Director Ela Rivera. Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe.
Agreed. It is a fair question. Just I'll make myself available for a conversation, a briefing around this, but do also want to bring up again what I brought up back in March around land value capture strategies. Had asked for some analysis around that to be brought back. And I think brought back probably in the fall, so would not have been brought back before this conversation, but it's just the point of bringing other ideas into the sphere so we could have robust conversations about all the options that would be available to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem. Director Downey.
I guess I'm a little frustrated with my colleagues because I thought everybody voted against the pay raises at the last meeting because you were convinced that we should wait, look for what we could find, and then come back to the voters. Now I'm hearing you're all assuming the voters won't approve this, but yet you don't approve the increases in the rate. So I'm not sure how we solve this at all. I mean, looking at our budget, one of the largest factors is wages. Are we suggesting we get through the 3 negotiated contracts with our unions and then tell them, okay, we're not going to raise anything. We may have to take some back. I mean, to balance a budget, which is what some cities did during the last recession, we're going to have to back off our agreements with our employees. Remember, that's when we didn't have enough bus drivers either. It took a long time to finally get to the place where everybody can at least have the jobs filled to move the buses that we need. So everybody's saying, do more, do more, do more. I'm sorry, what more? What programs are you thinking? We've got a federal government that's probably not going to increase the amount of money we can get for at least a couple of years. We don't know what the state's doing. So at this point, you're right, we need to find a way, but this is part of the way. This is getting us at least some additional revenue. And I am convinced that if we don't show that we're asking the riders to be able to share in that pain, we're never going to get voters, even if we had a chance to get them in 2030, unless they're showing what we can do. And I'll tell you, I think I am the only one on this dais that took it to my council to try and get support for the bill in the assembly, to at least try and get us on the ballot, because nobody else would do it. I think that everybody up here needs to do our job. So if you are on Sandag, you need to be there arguing to make sure that when we look at redistributing some of the money under Transnet, that we have the ability to get more to help us. So let's not keep saying staff needs to cut more from programs, which we don't know how, without cutting rates or raising rates or cutting bus service. I mean, that's what we're going to get back. Eventually, if it's not this year, it'll be next year, the following year, to have a backup plan B, and it will be any route that has less than 20% seats filled is going to have to be cut, or whatever it might be. So be careful what you wish for, because that is exactly what's going to happen. So I'm kind of embarrassed that here we are, and we are not going to have a budget approved. So I don't know what happens. Maybe Sharon, you can share us. If we can't get a budget approved, what happens come the end of our fiscal year?
I would assume our state funding would be in jeopardy.
Yeah, it's never happened, so I haven't actually researched that. I will make sure that I research that before the June meeting of the board. But we then wouldn't have authority to pay any of our like contracted costs or our employee wages, so there would be a real question if staff would be allowed to process those invoices and those paychecks as of July 1st if we don't have an approved budget.
All right, let's go back to Director Ela Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to try to avoid completely rehashing every way we got here. But I also, I'm going to take some exception to the idea that those who voted against the budget are not doing our jobs. We are doing our jobs. We are representing our constituents. We are representing folks who, I'll just speak for myself. I'm representing the people who depend on this system and can't afford more. And before I tell them, pay more, I'm going to tell them I fought in every single way that I can to make sure that they didn't have to do that. And that what they're being asked to pay is the absolute minimum that we can charge them. And I don't care if that is half a penny less per ride. That's my job. So I'm doing my job. And I'm well aware of our responsibilities to pass a budget, make tough decisions all the time. And I'm even more aware of the responsibility that we have in our other spaces to fight. And so I'm going to just say this part. It's really difficult to hear this coming from the representative of a city that has been one of the staunchest opponents of public transportation at Sandag. So for years, when I'm fighting at the Sandag board for public transportation to be properly funded, and representatives of Coronado are speaking in opposition to that, that's made our job more difficult. When we've tried to have proportional representation of the city of San Diego at Sandag, and Coronado and some of the other cities here have consistently opposed those efforts to exert our proportional representation at that board, that's part of why we're here. We're here because for decades, public transportation was not being treated as an equal form of transportation as others. So how do we fix it? It's complicated and it's going to take time. And I absolutely 100% not will it be on the backs of our employees. I'm saying the urgency to find other paths needs to be turned up a whole lot. And we've pushed to have that conversation, and I appreciate that we are exploring it. But I'm gonna be honest, the ideas that we've put forward, I don't think have been treated with the same level of urgency or even the same level of seriousness as a sales tax. How is MTS working with other transit agencies to shift the playing field in such a way where transit agencies don't simply have to rely on sales tax? How is MTS leaning into tourism as a potential source of revenue in a way that it's not right now? And then absolutely, how are the folks who serve on this board who don't operate in a vacuum doing our work on our cities and at Sandag to prioritize transit? I know for a fact San Diego has not been the problem on that front. It has been other cities who are committed to denying San Diego proportional representation, who are committed to deprioritizing public transportation in those spaces. So again, I can appreciate frustration with the situation we're in, but the idea that those of us who are voting against this are not doing our job, that's offensive. And that those of us who are voting against it don't understand what we're doing, that's offensive as well. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly why I'm doing it. I know exactly who I'm doing it for.
So Chair Whitburn, maybe I could help direct the conversation at this point towards giving staff some feedback that would be helpful to us. So we've made the assumption based on the board's decision to ask Sandag to change the regional fare ordinance to add more money into the operating revenue line item. If you want us to remove that, we can do that. We'll need to then find another line item to take that away from, whether it's from reserves, shifting from capital, moving money. We are making assumptions of sales tax that we believe to be accurate based on what we are projecting in the economy and what we're hearing from consultants. We could go to the less conservative concept on those revenues and make that change. The other one is we could revisit the staff's recommendation to hold the non-represented personnel line item at 0. What am I forgetting here? We could assume other non-operating revenues are even more than what we're assuming in the budget.
Basically.
But so in other words, this is a budgeting process. It's not necessarily a policy decision-making process at this point, because we really do need to get this budget approved July 1.
Let's go to Director Foster, and then I'll do my best to help land this plane. Director Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. I think just so I understand what's in front of us, slide 13, I believe, talks about service levels. And so as we are talking about raising fares, we're also at the same point in time looking at decreasing service. Is that correct?
Yes, again, it's part of that trying to stretch out the fiscal cliff strategy. There's a little bit of that and a little bit of the fare.
Okay, and in here, it talks about rail, but it also talks about bus fixed route. It says decreasing 2.4%, but it also says, and additional changes planned for June service change. I don't know if this has been sent over in detail to us. Do we have that level of detail of what that is?
3 times a year, staff goes through a process where they look at our service network. As part of the comprehensive operations analysis, we've also already gotten some really great data. We don't bring to the board minor service changes. We only bring the major service changes, as we did with the Route 110. So we do.
That's TBD.
We are tweaking things. The June changes are going into effect. They've already been scheduled, bid out, et cetera. So those will be going into effect, and that's reflected in this budget.
But the ones that are referenced here as far as additional changes, those are TBD. You don't necessarily have the detail on them just yet. Is that?
No, so the planning department provides us with a list of all the routes and then the scheduled statistics for each one of those: revenue miles, revenue hours, totals.
I understand that. It's kind of what was.
No, these are based
on. What I'm looking for is, do we have? Just want to make sure I understand as I'm doing this and being asked to approve a budget, that I truly understand all of the service reductions. This indicates some service reductions are forthcoming. I just want to know, do we have exactly what those are?
No, these are the ones that are planned for June of this year, FY26. Is that correct, Gordon?
Yeah, so this is correct.
It's on the website. I just pulled it up. You want me to walk through them?
I just if you can send it, if you can send something over to my office just with what the information is, I think that would be.
The take ones are
acceptable.
already out on the system, right?
We could just send over the take one.
Yeah. And then just as I'm listening to the conversation, as we are conducting our analysis, and the question becomes, how do you have a conversation with a constituent that asks, have you done everything that you can do prior to simply increasing fares? Can you put together just a one pager on what those efforts have been so that we can see what that is? And I think that will start to provide some clarification to the board as to all of the steps that you have taken, and it'll be in one place because we have multiple conversations, multiple items. And I think that may be helpful in the board making decisions and providing more feedback that you're looking for. Is that request unreasonable to get that?
No, I mean, we've already kind of done that, but.
Well, again, what I don't want to do, Sharon, is go back through 5 presentations. If we can have it in one spot, that is concise, that shows here's what we have considered and what we have done. I think that would be helpful as we are trying to understand, did we take all the necessary steps? Or once we receive that, that may foster some thought process amongst the board to say, let's look at these additional items, A, B, C, D through Z.
Could we pull up the presentation from last month's board meeting on the FAIR study? And just let's walk through those.
Yes, if you just give me a few minutes, we'll go ahead and. pull it up.
Or would it be better to do the one from the EC?
One from the FAIR study just talked about the marketing efforts that I've been working on, but we also had the other chart where we talked about all the Transportation Task Force stuff. I can't remember which meeting that was.
No, well, we did, we ran through everything. I believe it was at the fair, when we presented the fairs.
Yes, we did have a few slides on that. It was marketing efforts, and then we also touched on a few other things as well.
Well,
it wasn't comprehensive the way we've done it in the past.
Well, where we walked through all of the things that we've done to try to increase non-operating revenues, where we've gone through all of the things that we've done with belt tightening. I'm just trying to help us get the feedback we need in order to get a June operating budget.
So while Director Foster, did you have anything else that you wanted to weigh in on?
No, other than I just don't.
You would like to
again,
see
I was
a
going to
summary.
just say, it sounds like staff needs more time to put their thoughts together. And it probably, again, my request is if we can follow up with some information, because I just don't think what you're requesting, Sharon, I don't see that happening as we are sitting here having this conversation based on my observation and what I'm hearing. So I'll conclude there. That's my request, to send over that information so that the board has it and our teams can go back and provide the necessary feedback to get us back here in June and have that level of conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Foster. And I think that staff is looking for the presentation from last month as part of the conversation around the board's ultimate decision to recommend a fair increase. There was a fair amount of discussion of what else this board and the staff have done to try to increase revenues or reduce costs. So we can see if we can have a concise summary of that from last month's slide presentation. If not, I'm sure somebody would be able to compile that to bring back to the board. Let me ask a question. When is SANDAG going to make its decision on the fare increase? Last month, both MTS and North County Transit District on the same day voted, the boards of MTS and the board of NCTD voted to recommend to SANDAG that it raise fares. It's ultimately SANDAG's decision, one way or the other. When does SANDAG make that decision?
So there will be 2 meetings about that. The first one is on June 12th. That's what it's planned for right now. We are going to host 2 public hearings with SANDAG for the public to attend, and that's happening on June 9th. There will be one in the MTS service territory and then one in NCTD service territory. So then after June 9th, then you have the first hearing at the SANDAG Transportation Committee, June 12th. And then at their July Transportation Committee would be a final decision made on that.
At their July Transit Committee?
Yeah, July, yes.
So that will happen after we need to have passed a budget.
I would like to interject. The June 12th meeting, Transportation Committee, they have the authority. The Board of SANDAG has given authority to the Transportation Committee
to
decide
decide
fares.
you sit on, correct?
I am the primary,
Yeah.
but I will not be attending. Let the record show on the 12th.
Okay. So on the 12th, The Sandag Transportation Committee will vote, and it has the authority to set that vote, to take that vote for Sandag. So we'll know on June 12th whether or not Sandag is going to increase fares.
So, no.
So when is our meeting in June?
Mark also knows the dates exactly when will be.
June
Our
18th.
Okay, so our meeting in June is on June 18th. So we'll know.
But no, the July board, I'm sorry, the July Transportation Committee is when they will have the final, because they have to have 2 readings of it.
That's correct, is the way we understand it from hearing from Sandag. There will be a presentation about it at the June meeting, but ultimately a vote by the Transportation Committee will be taken in July. That's the way I understand it from Sandag staff.
Okay.
That would be July 17th, Chair.
July
That'll be-
17th
yes.
is when the Sandag Transportation Committee will vote on fares. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. We do have the staff presentation to answer some of the questions about what has this board and MTS done in terms of seeking revenue increases and cost containment. And I will hand it over to staff to walk through those slides.
Thank you, Chair. So at the last meeting, we did talk about some non-fare operating revenue and the historical trends here that we've seen. And really, we've seen a lot of growth in this category over time, particularly with advertising, where it's more than doubled over the past 10 years. Also energy credits, those are a critical stream of revenue for MTS. And the marketing department is exploring new initiatives with digital advertising, as Gordon had referred to with the gas lamp digital port and the success there. So we're looking at expanding that portfolio as well. But as you can see here from the growth since FY 2016, we have had an aggressive strategy towards growing this portfolio of non-fare revenue. It's gone from about 13.4 million to 28.9 million is what we're estimating for FY 27. So of all these different things that we're talking about, whether it's advertising, energy credits, land management, and other things like that, there has been significant growth in this pot of funding for MTS. Some of the new and ongoing non-fare revenue things that we're looking at is increasing, this advertising revenue. We think that there is some growth here. Is it going to bridge the whole budget gap for us? No, it won't, but every dollar helps, as we know. So we are looking at new vehicle wraps, like Gordon had mentioned, the rapid routes that we previously haven't wrapped. We think there's a good source of new non-fare revenue there. We are looking at building a series of digital kiosks in downtown. We have 3 right now that we're looking at, or actually 4, and we're going to expand that to 5 at 12th and Imperial, Convention Center Station, America Plaza, Little Italy, and also Snapdragon Stadium. We are looking at a new digital billboard at the Copley facility, which is right along the 52. We are in negotiations with Clear Channel to build a new billboard there on the 52. That should generate a significant revenue, probably about $1 million per year. Onboard trolley digital monitors. These provide next arrival information inside the vehicles, but also have a mechanism for advertising revenue that we can generate. We can place ads on those as well. We are looking at more station advertising opportunities, expanding our bus shelter portfolio in many communities. We've developed MOUs with some other cities. And so we're going to be taking over their shelter and bench portfolios and bringing them in-house to MTS. And then we can turn around and generate some more advertising, not only to generate more money, but also to make it more consistent within our entire system. We're also looking at smaller things like an online merchandise store, and as I mentioned, more bus and shelter opportunities there for advertising. With land management, transit-oriented developments, they can be very successful if you want to generate more non-fare revenue. Lately, with board policy, we've been prioritizing affordable units. We aren't generating any non-fare revenue off of that, but certain market rate developments that we've had have generated us about $700,000 per year. So if the board chose to go in a different direction with that, we could generate some additional non-fair revenue. But certainly there is a lot of value for having affordable units out there. There is a housing crisis in San Diego. So, but it is something that could generate us more non-fair revenue if we have more market units out there. Concessions, we're continuing to build more concessions at our facility to generate more rent. And that's more income for MTS, but also provides more services out there for our customers who are on their trips. And then we have renegotiated and gotten smarter with some of our contracts and modernized these contracts for increased lease rates for our billboard portfolio that we have throughout our system on properties that we own. So naming rights agreements, these are ongoing. We've secured some really good ones the last couple of years with UC San Diego Health for the Alvarado station and then Union Grantville for the Grantville station. We are in active negotiations right now with some advertisers at Comic-Con to actually sponsor our special event line and name that for a short-term period. That could generate us some more non-fair revenue as well. And we also are working to our employer outreach program. We have 150 existing bulk pass programs for businesses where they do get bulk passes and they do provide a subsidy for that for their employers or for their employees. And so that's something that we're looking to add and get more businesses associated with that. So we are going out there and pounding the pavement and talking to businesses proactively to get them involved in this program to generate more revenue that way. UPass programs can be very successful as well, as we've seen with UC San Diego. We've had many good active discussions with San Diego State, which is the other major large university in San Diego. Then they are receptive to a UPass program. The stars just haven't aligned from their point of view with the students and the student union and other priorities they have for fees and things like that they put out to a referendum for the students. But we continue to have those discussions with them. And we think that'll come to fruition, particularly as the Mission Valley site begins to build out. And there is that connection between the two campuses. Sharon and I actually had a really good meeting with the president of SDSU a couple of weeks ago and did talk about the connectivity there and a potential UPass with the students as well. So it is something we continue to actively pursue. Some of these things with non-fair revenue, it's not something where you can just get it in year one or year two. Sometimes they take 3 to 4 to 5 years. And particularly if you're talking about big things that can actually generate you tens of millions of dollars, they take time. And we see with like big construction projects or like with Midcoast Trolley Extension, that took decades, right? Great line extension, but sometimes when you have to think big, these things take some time to develop. And unfortunately, with some of the challenges that we have with the budget, time is not on our side right now. We continue to ramp up special events and really focusing on airport and, Padres games and the things happening at Snapdragon Stadium. And we've had really, really good ridership numbers there to increase ridership among those who don't ride all that often. Corporate partnerships, we continue to grow these. We've had great working relationships with the Padres as well as San Diego FC and the Wave and others. So really trying to capitalize not only on their brands, but also the brand connectivity that we have with MTS and their brand and trying to make some inroads there. And we've really done a good job. I think one of the challenges, and it's a good challenge to have, is really the parking availability that we have now. And some of our parking rides are over capacity. So it's really good news. Next month, we're going to be opening up Claremont, which is a new parking option along the Midcoast segment there that will be open for special event season and also Comic-Con. So we're excited to see these partnerships really pan out and help with our special event ridership. So those are the slides that we presented last time on what we're doing with non-fair revenue.
Can you put on the slides that show the legislative stuff? Okay.
Oh, yes. And so at the last presentation, we also talked about some of these different funding sources that we've been really looking at. And these 4 on this page are the ones that we think have the best opportunity at the state level or local level to generate more revenue for MTS and help with the budget challenges that we have. Certainly at board direction, the local sales tax measure, either MTS led or a citizens initiative, is something that would really inject a large amount of funding into our operation, where we would anticipate about $300 million annually from this. But then also, as was mentioned earlier, Transportation Development Act, or TDA, and expanding that, going from a quarter cent to a half cent. That would be huge for us if we could make that happen. We know that there's some opposition, even from some transit agencies, that don't want to see this change. But it is something that we're actively pursuing, and that could generate us about $140 million annually. Also, as was mentioned, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund here, that is something that could take us some time, but it could generate us approximately $25 million annually. And then the ZETCP program is another one that we're looking to see if we can get some additional dollars out of that. But again, these things, you can see it's 2 years, 1 to 2 years. So it's nothing that's going to happen in a month that we can really depend on.
And now I'll talk about what's happening currently at the state level. So there's a proposal to shift funding, and it's going to the cardboard on March 28th. And some of you may have seen some of the Senator Blakespear, for instance, and some of the other state senators have come forward as part of a coalition, including transit agencies, housing advocates, et cetera, to oppose an attempt to shift the greenhouse gas reduction funds and possibly the zero emission transit capital program funds, which we rely on, to basically fund refineries and utilities to retrofit their infrastructure. What this could mean is a significant hit to MTS's budget for capital especially, but also we, then would have to probably shift priorities. There's even some talk that the discussion may move some of the funding from previously approved and awarded TIRCP projects. In other words, some of the projects that we might be already counting on may lose their funding. So this is all very of the moment. I was in Sacramento yesterday talking through this. I have a meeting with Diane Takborian this afternoon. Yeah, so I'm just bringing that up at this point in Mark's presentation, because while we might be looking at these other options and we're fighting for it, we're not getting the support yet at the state level. So we can't really rely on some of these things to come to our help in this regard.
Thank you very much to our CEO and to Mr. Olson for that presentation.
There are a few more items that were on that of the other funding mechanisms that we had looked at in that presentation that, given some of the comments, I feel like it might be worth it for Mark to at least quickly go through and identify that they were talked about last month.
Yes. So while we talked about these 4 options right here that we think are the most achievable in the shortest amount of time, there are a few others that we are looking at that are 5 years out. Fiscal impact's a little bit more unknown, but generating new revenue through land value capture, like obtaining authority to create a tax increment financing district. We're also looking at a property parcel tax, which would be a flat fee imposed on property parcels within a designated area. Some of these things may have significant opposition, but we are still looking at them. And with the parcel tax, that could generate us $25 to $50 million annually. It would take about 2 to 4 years to really push this, and it would also take a vote. It would have to go to a vote on a ballot as well. Zero emissions vehicle registration fee expansion, seeing what we can do on this front. Legislation is required to increase registration fees statewide. And this would take 2 to 4 years, generate us a smaller amount, but still worthwhile to really look at and pursue and keep an eye on. That would be $5 million to $13 million annually, possibly a ride share tax. There would be some significant opposition, we think, to this, but it is still something that we think that is worth looking at and studying and continuing to research. Also a vehicle license fee, vehicle registration fees, seeing what we could do there. This would require a local voter approval on a future ballot measure. It's really unknown how much this could generate us. More research would be done. But we just wanted to give you an idea of these different things that we see as really things that we could reach. They will take a lot of lift, But we did want to make sure that the board saw these things that we were working on that do take some time, but we think that they're worth looking at, researching, and continuing to pursue.
Yeah, and I've already had conversations as well on the land value capture strategies with a consultant who works in that space. And I'll continue to look into pursuing that. But again, those are things that take time and will not be able to be used to balance FY 27's budget.
All right, thank you again. Let me sort of summarize where we are here, how we've gotten here, and float an idea of how we might proceed. As Mark described, not only MTS, but I think every public transit agency in the country is heavily subsidized. Public transit in the US does not pay for itself. It is viewed as a public good. And that is true of all public transit agencies, and MTS is heavily subsidized by both the federal and state governments. We are subject to the vagaries of that funding. And amid that, and amid the pandemic and the impacts of that, this board has made it a priority to keep service levels as high as we possibly can. And we've made it a priority to keep fares as low as we possibly can. The combination of being dependent on subsidies, keeping our service levels, therefore expenses, high, keeping our fares and revenue lower than it otherwise might be, has a major impact on where we are right now with needing to address future budget gaps. There have been a number of discussions about how we can approach that, and very valid ones. There's been talk about a revenue measure. There's been talk about increasing non-fare revenue, as Director Elo Rivera, and we just saw it in the presentation. There's been a lot of discussion around that. There's been discussion about advocating for Sacramento to provide more resources, and all of those efforts need to continue. The most immediate levers that we have at our disposal to balance a budget for FY 27 are service cuts and fare increases. And this is a conversation that this board has been having for months. And one thing is plain: nobody wants to cut service and nobody wants to increase fares. But those are the two levers that are at our immediate disposal. And based on surveys of riders, based on surveys of this board and where our priorities lie, and the board last month made the very difficult decision to recommend to Sandag that it increase fares for the first time in years. The North County Transit District made a similar recommendation. That is now in Sandag's hands. That decision is now something that Sandag is going to decide upon ultimately in July. What I'm hearing is how much revenue, if those fares were to go up, how much revenue would that generate from the fare increase?
It's approximately $9 million for next year's budget. We could back that out if we want to wait
so
until
about,
that switch happens.
About $9 million. There is a reluctance by many members of this board today to recommend that we balance our budget based on a $9 million fare increase. There's a reluctance to endorse that approach. So I will offer the suggestion. How much do we have in reserves right now?
In the out years for SB 125, we have $140 million or so.
Okay, so I will offer the suggestion that we recommend that staff balance the proposed budget with $9 million of reserves. And then we pass that budget using $9 million of reserves. If Sandag ultimately passes a measure to increase fares, then that will be their decision. We will build it into our budget and we will restore the $9 million to reserves. Does that sound, there's no easy answers here, but does that sound like a reasonable, acceptable approach for now to this board?
Chair, from what I'm hearing about our deadlines, I do think that we have a little bit of time to do some work with the board members. I think that we have been, even after COVID, which I agree, Sharon, that it just really changed everything. We did not change with COVID. We have not, and I do appreciate the slide, especially the dense slide about the different options. But what I hear from board members, and they will correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have really wanted to dig into those options for the last few years. And because we have not done that, we feel like we're each year given an ultimatum that does not take into account the various options that we may have, whether we vote them up or down. And so resolving for this today, I want to get to yes. I do not want MTS to be in a precarious position of not having an adopted budget. I will not be voting on anything today because I don't want to, I want to make sure that we have requests that have just been made in the last 20 minutes that I have heard board members say they need to see certain things before they vote on a budget. This is certainly a numbers conversation, but the decisions we make in the budget have policy implications on the back end. So I think that the one pager that Member Foster talked about, Sharon, you mentioned you're talking with a consultant. I hadn't really received any updates on that, although, I wanted to start that conversation in March. The whole picture that I saw was, I just want to be able to tell the constituents that I have been able to evaluate every option, whether that's projected out 3 years, 4 years, whether we decide as a board that we put together a strategy. I've heard Councilmember Moreno talk about having a strategy with our state representatives many times. We could possibly look at expanding TDA. We have not done any of that work. And I'm saying board members too, right? What about our lease agreements? We don't know. We want to make sure we're getting the market value for all of our lease agreements. What are we subsidizing even at the county level? I know that it talks with Member Sankey before, there was always a talk about the Coronado Ferry. Are we subsidizing that? These are all things that have been brought up in the last 30 minutes, right? And so I am not comfortable with saying, let's do reserves right now. Maybe that's where we land the next meeting. I think that's an idea that we have to put out there along with everything that everyone else has said, because it is not that staff has not put together a budget for us and has not worked hard. All those things are true. There is a bigger picture that when COVID did what it did to us, we did not adapt So we're trying to use the same solutions that we would have used pre-COVID to exist 6 years later in what feels like over a decade later. So that's where I'm coming from. Just I want our suggestions to be taken seriously at this board, and that we can make informed decisions, because we do have to go back to our constituency and say, we tried everything that we could.
And I do want to stress that the proposals that we were showing you have been things that we've been trying to pursue at the state level. I've talked about TDA reform for years. I've been advocating on behalf of
the task force, yes.
And this is something, and all of the things that the task force for the 2 years that we were meeting were going through, we kept trying to advocate on behalf of these funding streams, and we were getting stymied by other constituencies at the state level. But that's not to say that we're not going to continue trying. Cap and invest. The reform we got with SB 125 was a significant lift to get us this funding. That was a major focus for us, and it helped us continue these conversations to try to get to the consensus statewide in the industry. So I want to recognize that our staff, the board, we've all been advocating for these things over the years. It's just that it's being stymied by other forces that are also out there trying to advocate for their own best interests.
Director Moreno.
I wanted to make 2 points. One, I would implore the chair and the vice chair, this body absolutely needs a budget committee. And I think this is a good example of things that could have been worked out at a budget committee. So I want to implore that once again. The other point that I wanted to make is, and I think I made this 2 months ago, regarding Sandag Major Corridor Projects, EMP. It was stated by the CEO, Mario Orso, at our retreat that transit agencies can potentially look at major corridor projects, EMP, as sources of funding. So once again, I would implore staff, is that a heavy lift? 1000%. But a tax is going to be an even heavier lift. So once again, imploring, what have we done since I brought this up 2 months ago? And please keep that in consideration for future budget funds.
Thank you, Director Moreno. All right, we do not, the goal today is not to actually pass a budget. That will be in front of us next month. The item today was to provide direction to staff on the revenue and cost assumptions so that they could build a budget or finalize a budget proposal to bring to us next month. I would recommend at this point that, first of all, staff put together a sheet or two of responsive to the board's request for information about what this, so along the lines of what you just presented, Mark. What have we done to address the budget gap, and so on. So let's get just some information that we could put together. It could be sent out to the board, distributed here next month, answering some of the questions that have come up by the board. And then I would recommend that you bring 2 versions of the budget for us next month. One that relies on the fare increase to balance the budget, the other that relies on fares to balance the budget. I mean, they're similar except for that one thing, and we can see how the board wants to approach that.
You meant reserves.
What did I say?
You said fares on both.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, fares on one. So what we've got in front of us right now, what you brought today, as one, and then another alternative that would use reserves instead, with the assumption that if Sandag takes action on fares, we would make that adjustment later, but it would be in their hands and their decision. Does that sound like, first to staff, does that sound like a reasonable approach? And then I'll see if my colleagues are okay with that.
As part of the public hearing, we do have to release the draft budget to the public 15 days in advance, 15 business days in advance of that public hearing. So I don't know if we're allowed to publish 2 for the public.
Yeah, I think that the intent is just so that the public has the details that the board will have, at that level to have the discussion. So we would just need to publish both versions and make it clear that the board would be considering both versions.
My question though is that going to give the board enough to make the decision in June? Should we schedule another board meeting?
Well,
Well, this is the end of May, of June. It would have to be in the beginning of June.
So let me ask, let's go to Vice Chair Goebel first. Go ahead.
I'd only ask those who say, have we done everything that we can before we vote for fair increase? For those who take that position, could you give staff a goal line, what everything needs? Otherwise, you're playing on a football field with no goal line. How much will be enough? If staff puts together a one-pager says, this is everything we have done, will that be enough? So for those members who take the position, have we done everything? Please let staff know what everything, the goal line for everything is. Otherwise, you're continually chasing a never-ending line. That's my ask.
Does anybody, so let me ask this question to see if there's any feedback on it. Does the board believe that if we provide the board with information responsive to the questions that have been asked here and present 2 versions of the budget at next month's regularly scheduled board meeting, one that builds in the fare increase, the other that uses reserves instead, do you feel that we are likely to be able to come to a decision that will approve one of those as a budget next month? Or should we plan to schedule another meeting before then to allow for further discussion of this? Don't everybody jump at once. I mean, I feel, on some level, there's a world in which, go ahead, Ron.
The executive committee is on the 11th. How about if everybody just calls the executive committee?
If everybody
comes to the executive committee, would that be too late for everybody?
Is that a Brown Act issue?
Well, that won't give us 15 days before June 18th.
So it'd have to be by the 3rd.
But we could publish both in time for the 11th. I mean, the executive committee is the budget development committee. So if you felt comfortable having them, well.
I mean, so Brown Act, we would have time for the board to cancel the executive committee and replace it with a board meeting.
So yeah, let's do it.
But it's just, we probably wouldn't, it would be additional discussion and then we would still have the board meeting and we would be doing the public notice of the budget packet. I don't think that we could do 15 days in advance of June 11th. Like I don't know that we'd have those budget books available by tomorrow to meet that deadline. So we could still have budget books published for the notice for the June 18th meeting, but we would have the full board here on June 11th to give us additional discussion and then those changes could be incorporated.
Well, we could call it a workshop on
Yes.
June 11th?
Yeah.
To kind of workshop the two
Yes.
proposals?
I think we can work out what needs to be published. The intent of the publication requirement is not that the board would not have discretion to make any changes from the budget that's published. So, certainly, like, I think if we still count on doing the 15-day notice of the budget for the June 18th meeting, and that's where you make the final decision, but we could then have a workshop on the 11th. We can make all that comply with our legal requirements.
So do you want to make that a board meeting or a committee of the whole, or how do you want to characterize that?
I think it would be a board workshop. So it would just be, right now, the executive committee is 7 members, and we would need to make sure that we had at least 8 members attend that meeting to have a quorum of the board. So we would need to follow up with our other members who are not on the executive committee and see if they could attend a June 11th meeting.
If we characterize it as a workshop, is there other business that we need to do, or?
Well, I don't think we have anything that would be pressing at the EC.
No.
Okay, so we could just do a workshop.
Yeah.
All right.
But the challenge is we did just have this same presentation and it was moved forward by the executive committee already. And I don't remember what the vote was, 6-1 or 6-0, right? 4-1. So we would need to have a substantial number of board members to make it so that it would definitely reflect the board's.
Right.
meeting.
Well, we certainly would need at least 8 members, but yeah, ideally as many as could attend, because we'd like it to be substantive, productive discussion so that it moves forward and allows the board to have a full discussion on the 18th of the issues that they wanted resolved.
Okay.
Worst case scenario, could you have a executive committee from like 8 to 9, and then they have have a workshop after that?
Yeah, but we don't have any items that need to go to the executive committee. So, some of
It's
them, I think,
just doing bureaucracy.
yeah.
Director Downey.
I'm just confused why, I was counting the days. We have 15 days between today and the 11th. So why couldn't we just make it a regular a special board meeting, but why couldn't it be a board meeting?
Just the budget. So for us to approve the budget, we have to publish documents 15 days in advance. I don't know that staff can get that publication ready by tomorrow to kind of get that ready where you could adopt a budget on June 11th. So I think that the June 11th would be a workshop, work through these things, and then the adoption of the budget would still happen on June 18th. And we would be publishing those booklets before the June 11th meeting, because
Okay.
to meet that deadline, they just wouldn't be far enough in advance for you to adopt the budget on June 11th.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you, Director Downey. All right. So we will call a board workshop for June 11th. And hopefully as many board members as can will attend that, and we'll try to position ourselves for a successful meeting on June 18th at that time. Any further discussion on this item? Okay, we're not going to be able to complete the agenda items that we had scheduled for today, but let me ask, is there anything on the remainder of the agenda that is essential that we do today?
Well, we can't approve anything. We don't have a quorum.
Well, that settles that. All right.
Sorry.
Okay, very good. We will trail these items to future meeting or meetings. Are there any board communications beyond what we have discussed? We've communicated enough. All right, fair enough. All right, our next board meeting is, well, we're going to have a board workshop on June 11th. And we'll do that at regularly scheduled time of 9 o'clock. And that'll be followed by our next board meeting on June 18th. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.